Hi, Dr. Zachary. How are you doing?
Hello, hello. Doing well, thanks. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, I can
Yes,
hear you.
yes, we can hear you.
Yep.
Wonderful.
It's great to have you.
Great to be here.
So, guys,
Pleasure.
let me introduce Dr. Zachary Foster. Dr. Zachary Foster is a historian and frequent contributor to global media outlets, including Haaretz and the Turkish news outlet TRT. He founded the digital archive Palestine Nexus and writes a newsletter called Palestine in Your Inbox. Dr. Foster is a senior law fellow at the Rutgers Center for Security, Race and Rights. He holds an MA in Arab Studies from Georgetown University and earned his PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University with his thesis, The Invention of Palestine. Dr. Foster's research delves into the history of Palestine in addition to the development of the Palestinian identity. Welcome, Dr. Zachary Foster. It's really a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you, thank you. Would you like to tell us anything before we start with like the myths that we would like to ask you to teach us about them?
Well, please feel free to ask a question. I'm happy to speak about anything. So yeah, why don't we just jump in with a question?
Okay. So, first point, like we keep here Zionist propaganda. They keep saying that Palestinians are Arabs that immigrated to Palestine in the Islamic conquest in the 7th century AD, despite the fact that like DNA shows otherwise. So we would like to ask you, does this have any truth to it? And if not, where did this myth come from?
Sure thing. So first of all, thank you for that question. Um, I think this myth was first propagated by a American journalist who passed away in 2015. Her name is Joanne Peters, and in 1984 she published a book called From Time Immemorial. And at the time, this book, when it was first published, received praise in the media. And what happened after she published the book was that this myth that you just said started to propagate, because in the book she argues that many Arabs from surrounding countries like Egypt, like Syria, like Lebanon, moved to British Mandatory Palestine as a result of the influx of Zionist immigrants. Her argument was that Palestine was mostly uninhabited, and that actually the Palestinians were actually Egyptians and Syrians and Lebanese, right? And that they moved to Palestine because of all of this, Zionist investment in the country and so on. And obviously, this book was later the subject of the PhD dissertation by Norman Finkelstein, who many of you probably are familiar with. And what Norman Finkelstein did was he went through every single sentence of this book. He went through every single footnote in the book and determined that the entire book, literally from beginning to end, was a piece of fraudulent research. Every single source was manipulated. Every single a data point, statistic that was cited was manipulated. It was a piece of fraud. And then, after he published his PhD dissertation, which again debunked the book from beginning to end and showed how she manipulated statistics, she invented data, and basically produced a piece of fraudulent research. So after he published his dissertation research debunking this book of hers that had received praise from a number of popular authors and commentators, then a bunch of other researchers looked into the book, including an Israeli historian by the name of Yehoshua Porath, who is one of the most serious historians of the history of Palestine. And he also determined that the book was a piece of fraudulent research, that it was nothing but mythology and propaganda packaged as historical research. And so at this point, there's, as far as I know, zero serious historians. Let me repeat that. There are zero historians that believe the argument that the Palestinian people are, basically just Syrian and Egyptian immigrants. That claim is essentially completely debunked. So that is what I would say about that question.
Thank you.
Is it
Thank
okay
you
if
so
I
much.
can ask a question,
Yes,
engineer?
go ahead, Monica, go ahead.
Okay, so Dr. Zach, I wanted to ask you something. So how do we respond to the vile Zios out there? Because I know that there are some Zios that are very vile and they really like to brag about what they did in the IDF. So how do we respond to them hearing the things that they say?
Do you have any specific kinds of comments that you're thinking about, or
Yes. So basically, there's this one Zio on here. I know most of the pro pallies know who I'm talking about. He likes to brag about, unaliving women and children and just like all like the most vile stuff that you'll ever hear. So I'm just curious as to like how would we as pro pallies, how would we respond to something like that?
Yeah. Well, I think my starting point for thinking about and talking about what is happening right now in Palestine and Gaza in particular is international law, especially international humanitarian law, which of course has its problems, but is, in my opinion, the basis for talking about Palestine because international humanitarian law prohibits occupation, apartheid. It prohibits belligerent military occupation. It obviously prohibits genocide. And so what we're witnessing in Gaza is all of those things. For the past 17 years, Israel has been imposing a devastating siege on Gaza, whose purpose, according to Israeli military officials, was to punish the civilian population of Gaza for having elected Hamas in 2006. Now, as we all know, collective punishment is illegal. It's illegal because you cannot punish someone for having committed crimes committed by other people. I mean, this is not just international humanitarian law; it's basic common sense. Should anyone in this room be charged and arrested and imprisoned for crimes committed by other people? I mean, is there a single person on planet Earth that would think a person should suffer consequences for crimes committed by other people? I think 0 people on planet Earth think they should go to prison for a crime committed by someone else. So that is just a nonsensical belief. And so the 17-year siege on Gaza is illegal. It's inhumane. It has led to the deaths of thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Gazans who cannot leave the Gaza Strip, who cannot receive medical treatment outside of the Gaza Strip. I would cite the example of Fatima al-Masri, a 2-year-old Palestinian girl who in 2022 was denied an exit permit to leave Gaza to receive life-saving medical treatment that was not available in the Gaza Strip because of the siege and because of the blockade. And what did she do? What crime did she commit? Nothing. Her only crime was being born a Palestinian in Gaza. Okay? So that was the status. That was the condition for 2.2 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. That was the condition for 17 years, an entire generation of Palestinians in Gaza living in an open-air prison, raw sewage flowing through the streets, swimming in a sea of raw sewage because they don't have enough electricity to filter the water and treat the water because Israel denies them electricity. Israel denies them the right to control their own airspace. Israel denies them the right to control their own population registry. Israel denies them the right to have an economy, to import anything, to export anything. We're talking about a total siege and a blockade. In the words of the former advisor to Ariel Sharon, Dov Weissglass, we're going to put Palestinians on a diet. Why? Well, we don't think the world will allow us to starve Palestinians to death. Turns out he was wrong about that. So instead, we're going to put Palestinians on a diet, and we're going to calculate exactly how many calories are needed to prevent the population from starving to death, and that is how many calories we will allow into Gaza. And that was the attitude of the every single Israeli prime minister for the past 17 years. So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with an inhumane and illegal siege and a blockade for 17 years, which came at the tail end of a 56-year belligerent military occupation. And now we're seeing the consequences of what happens when Palestinians try to resist that belligerent military occupation and that inhumane, cruel siege. They're slaughtered. They're ethnically cleansed. There's a genocide being perpetrated against them for having the audacity to resist their own imprisonment, their own occupation, and the besiege that has been imposed upon them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foster.
I wanted to ask, to relate to your question, Engineer, if you don't mind me asking, because there's another notion that the Arabs, majority of the Palestinians come when the British mandate come into place. So there was all migrant workers from, I don't know, from the Middle East, from neighboring countries.
Right. We did address that. I mean, just to summarize the point again, there were about 600,000 Palestinian Arabs living in Palestine on the eve of World War I. So let's say around 1914. Okay, yeah. 600,000, about 5 to 10% of whom were Jewish.
Yeah.
In 1880, the percentage of the population that was Jewish was more like 5%.
More 5, yeah.
So this idea that Palestine was empty and was inhabited by immigrants from Egypt and Syria is a myth. It was first propagated by Joanne Peters in her book From Time Immemorial, which was a piece of fraudulent research based on falsified documents, and which has been debunked already by Norman Finkelstein literally 40 years ago. So it's no serious people take that argument at its face value. It is considered by 100% of historians to be mythology and propaganda.
Okay, sorry, you did mention that earlier. I thought you was talking about the Muslim conquest. Thank you. Apologies for making you repeat yourself again.
No worries at all. My pleasure.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. I'm really honored for meeting you here. People know me here as Abu Siraj. I'm from the Gaza Strip. I'm talking to you from the Gaza Strip right now. And I've always wanted to find someone who has enough knowledge to guide me. As a Palestinian man, sometimes I find it hard for me to find reliable sources about the history of our region, things that I can use when debating with Zios or to defend our cause against those who question our existence and our identity. If you may recommend us of certain resources that we can depend on, along with your books, of course, to use that we can use in order to defend our cause and understand the history of our region in a better way.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, Abu Siraj, thank you so much for joining us, and my heart goes out to you and everyone else in Gaza right now, and just praying and hoping and wishing for your safety and an immediate end to this genocide. So thank you so much for joining us. As far as literature on Palestine, I would highly recommend, first of all, the books of Noor Masalha. He is a Palestinian historian based in the UK. He wrote a book that had a huge impact on me. And the name of the book is escaping me right now, but it was published in 1992. And it's about the history of transfer thinking in the Zionist community from the 1880s to the 1940s, right? So it's basically a history of Zionist leaders and Zionist settlers in Palestine talking about expelling the Arabs and how we're going to need to expel the Arabs in order to create a Jewish state in Palestine. I highly recommend, he has written multiple books. I highly recommend all of them. I would also recommend the books of Ilan Pappé. He is an Israeli historian based in the UK as well, and has published books on the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. He has a new book called The Israel Lobby, where he documents the history of attempts in the UK and in the United States to influence governments and to influence the policies of those governments to support Israel. I would also recommend the books of Norman Finkelstein, Rashid Khalidi, Noura Arakat, Hillel Cohen, and many, many others. I mean, those are just to name a few. Simha Flapan, I would recommend as well. He has a very good book. on a history of kind of myths in Israel. Was published in the 1980s. I believe it's called Myths in Israel. Or I could be getting that name wrong. But there's so many good books. I'm obviously happy to share out a list of those books. If you want to just send me an email, I can send you an email with all of those titles and many more. So you can find my contact or just send me a DM on Twitter or here on this platform as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you so much, and I will definitely DM you.
So another point that I would like to address, Dr. Foster, there is a narrative that Zionists keep mentioning. They say that Palestine was Jewish majority, but the Ottoman Empire moved some Arabs, Muslims, and Christians there, and then it became a Muslim majority. Does this have any truth to it, or do you know where did this myth come from?
I have to confess, I've actually never even heard that myth before, but no, there's no truth to that whatsoever. The best research on Ottoman demographics in the early period actually was published by none other than Bernard Lewis, who I wouldn't recommend his scholarship on anything, but he has published a number of studies on Palestine in the 16th century and has made use of the Ottoman records. What were they called? The Defterleris, I think, from the early Ottoman period, from the 16th century. Palestine was 80%, 90% Muslim. I mean, I don't know that's why I'm like, I'd never even heard that before. Palestine was 80+% Muslim every single year for the past many, many centuries, if not, we're talking about more than a millennia, right? So I honestly don't even know where that myth comes from.
Thank you. So, guys on the panel, does anybody have a question? If not, there are some people in the comments that have questions, so we will have to rotate.
I have a question for Zubaida.
Zubaida, go ahead.
Yeah, I have two, if you guys don't mind. First of all, it's an honor to meet you, Doctor. Thank you for being here because this is extremely, extremely important. So many of us, we engage in many, online discussions and even debates with these Zionists because, the propaganda machine is a tool that they use to spread misinformation. And one of the things that they say is that, well, Palestine never existed. It was never a country. And prior to the state of Israel, it was owned by the British Mandate. And then prior to that, it was the Ottomans, to basically negate that these people were ever real. And the way that I kind of counteract that is, well, many places in the world were not countries or nation states or states because these are very new modern concepts. But a people is not defined whether they are like an official state, because it's like denying the native Indians that they were ever a real people because they didn't have a Congress, for instance. But nonetheless, this is like one of their main talking points, and it's like semantics, if you know what I mean. But I mean, how would you answer that when they say, well, Palestine never existed, it was never a country?
Yeah, certainly. First of all, thank you so much for that question. It is, in fact, the subject of my dissertation research. It is a study of a history of the idea of Palestine. Like, when did people call the place Palestine, and when did they start to call themselves Palestinians? That is the subject of, I spent 10 years trying to answer those questions. So, I could talk for 5 hours about those questions. But let me just say one thing first, which is that whether or not people called the place Palestine, whether or not the Palestinians thought of themselves as Palestinians, or whether they thought of themselves as Muslims or Arabs or anything else, has no bearing, has no impact on the question of should Israel be allowed to carry out a genocide in Gaza? Should Israel be allowed to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from Masaf Faryata or Humsa or Ain Khan al-Ahmar or anywhere else in the West Bank, right? These have nothing to do with one another. The first is an intellectual question. It's a question of history. It's an interesting question, but it simply said it has no bearing on should Israel withdraw its illegal soldiers from Gaza or from the West Bank? Should Israel end the apartheid regime? Should Israel treat all people under its rule equally? These are totally unrelated questions. So that would just be the first general point I would make on that question. Now, to actually answer the question, since the origins of the Islamic period, so we're talking going back 1,300 years, the word Palestine or Philistine in Arabic has been in more or less continuous use in Arabic. Okay, so in the early Islamic period, from about the year 7, let's say from the time of the Islamic conquest of Palestine. So now we're talking like 7th, 8th century, until about the end of the 10th century. So until about 995, when there was a big earthquake in the region. Palestine was a district in the Umayyad Caliphate. So under the Umayyads, there was a district known as Jund Philistine. You also had Jund al-Urdun, you had Jund al-Homs, you had these different districts, and one of them was Philistine. And then after the Crusader conquest, at the end of the 10th century, at the end of the 10th or 11th century, what happened was Palestine fell out of use because the Umayyad Caliphate was, at least in Palestine, was taken over by the Crusaders. And so what happened was the word Palestine fell out of use at the administrative level, but it continued to be used in texts written by Muslims and Christians and Jews for pretty much continuously for the next 1,000 years. And that is the subject of chapter 3 of my dissertation, where I document with meticulous detail, not dozens, but literally hundreds and hundreds of Muslim writers over the course of the past 1,000 years using the word Palestine. And there's actually a very, very simple reason why they were calling the place Palestine. Because, as you well know, many of you know who are familiar with the Muslim tradition, you're always going to be citing earlier sources in your tradition. Right, you're going to be citing the earlier sources are considered to be more authoritative, right? Because they're closer to the Prophet himself, and so they're more authoritative. And as I just said, for the first 300 years of Islamic rule, everyone was calling the place Palestine because that was a district in the Muslim Empire. And so in the 12th century and the 13th century and the 15th century and the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, Muslim writers continued to call the place Palestine because they were citing scholars from the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries when Palestine was an administrative district. So for the same reason, you and I know and have heard of places like Phoenicia, places like Mesopotamia, places like Rhodesia. We have all heard these words. Even if we may not call Rhodesia, we call it Zimbabwe. Even if we call Phoenicia, Lebanon. Even if we call Iraq, Mesopotamia, Iraq, we've all heard of those words because they were geographical terms that were in use in a previous period, and so we still are familiar with them. So that was the first context in which the word Palestine appears and reappears in Islamic texts more or less continuously for the past 1,300 years. The second point I would make is that in the Islamic tradition, you have, as you well know, you have the hadith literature. The hadiths, the sayings and doings of the Prophet Muhammad. And in the hadith, a hadith consists of two parts. It consists of the isnad, the chain of transmission, and it consists of the hadith itself, right? The text of the what was transmitted. And it was important to be able to trace the transmitters, like what was their point of origin, where did they live, where did they die, where did they travel to, in order to verify that this hadith was actually transmitted by this person. And in many, many hadith transmitters, we have the nisba, the appellation Palestini is used to describe hadith transmitters. So-and-so Palestini, so-and-so Iraqi, so-and-so, Shami. And Palestini was one of those nisbas that was used. Again, to refer to somebody from Palestine. So not only was Palestine used, but actually Philistini, the adjective to refer to someone from Palestine, was also used. And then I would mention a third use case of the word Palestine was anyone living in Ramla. And this may come as a surprise to many people, but at the district of Palestine, Jund Philistine, that was a district in the Umayyad Caliphate for 300 years. This district the capital of this district was not Jerusalem, it was not Al-Quds, it was not Nablus, it was not Gaza, it was Ramla, which is now a city of a few tens of thousands of people in central Israel, Palestine. So this city, because it was the capital of this district, what you have is in later generations, many writers. I could list you 6, 7, 8 writers from the city of Ramla who call the place Palestine, who call the land Palestine, Philistine, in their writings in the 12th century, in the 15th century, in the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries. Writers from Ramla are calling the place Palestine continuously. That is just the word they use. Just like we say Palestine today, they said Philistine in the 18th and 16th century as well. You have Khayr ad-Din al-Ramla, you have his son. Khayr ad-Din al-Ramla is a 17th century scholar who is actually famous all around the Ottoman world, and he's calling the place Palestine in his fatwa collection. His son, Nagham ad-Din al-Ramli, he also calls the place Palestine in a book of Ijazat that he wrote in the 17th century. Then you have an 18th century priest, Yusuf Jahshan, also from Ramle. He also calls the place Palestine in a manuscript he wrote. And then even in the 18th century, in the 1840s, if you look into the Sharia court records of Jerusalem, you have people calling Ramle Palestine. And so there's many contexts in which people are calling the place Palestine more or less continuously for the past 1,300 years in the Arab Muslim world. Now, as far as the modern Palestinian identity, when did sort of people start to say, Ana Falastini, I'm Palestinian? In the first reference I can find, and this is chapter 4 of my dissertation, the first reference I was able to find was in a book in English by a guy by the name of James Finn in the year 1860. So we're talking 2 decades before there were any real, Jews moving to Palestine. You already have the term Palestinian appearing in English to describe the native Arabs of Palestine. You have more references. That book was published in 1870, not 1860. And then you have multiple references in English and German and Russian in the 1880s and 90s. And the first Palestinian to use that term in Arabic, as far as I can tell, is a guy by the name of Khalil Bedas, who's from the Galilee. He may be from Nazareth. Now I'm forgetting. And he in 1898 is calling the place. He's calling himself Palestinian in a book he publishes called Al-Ard al-Muqaddisa, the Holy Land, which is a translation of a book from a Russian archaeologist to Arabic. He is using the word Palestinian all over that book to describe the modern Palestinians, the Arabic-speaking inhabitants of Palestine. And then you have many references in 1901. Najib Nassar calls himself Palestinian in the text he publishes in 1901. The same is true of Salim Qub'ain, who is also from the Galilee. He uses it in the text he publishes in 1901. And then you have something like 125 references to the term Palestinian in Arabic sources from 1898 to 1914. And that is what I would say about the question of the history of the words Philistine and Philistinian in Arabic.
Thank you so much for that in-depth answer. تفضل يا أبو سراج.
Yes, I have another question, Doctor. And this question is about what has been happening lately. I've never been outside Palestine. I didn't get the chance to travel because of the Israeli restrictions in the Gaza Strip. And I've always wondered, do you think that what happened lately in the Gaza Strip and the horrible things that they have done to us, has done a strategic damage to their image worldwide? Do you think that this will help us Palestinians in the road of liberation?
Thank you for that question, Abu Siraj. I think that the damage that has been done to the standing of the United States and obviously Israel, and I would say most of Europe as well, especially Germany, especially the UK, the damage is irreparable. For decades and decades, the United States has lectured countries around the world, China, Russia, Iran, for human rights violations. And now the United States is the co-author of the most vicious genocide that any of us have ever seen in our entire lifetime. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people slaughtered, overwhelmingly women and children, overwhelmingly civilians, overwhelmingly non-combatants. We're talking about the complete destruction of an entire society. All the hospitals, all the schools, all the universities, 80% of the housing stock. Everything in Gaza is destroyed, all of the agricultural land. There's nothing left. They've destroyed everything. We've never seen anything like this in our entire lives. And we probably never will see anything like this again. And this is sponsored and supported and funded by the United States, the country that claims to promote democracy, the country that claims to promote human rights. The damage is irreparable. I don't think the United States will ever have any credibility whenever it lectures other countries on human rights violations. So yes, you're absolutely correct, Abu Siraj. This is a huge setback. I mean, it's not that the United States has not done horrible things in the past. We were sponsoring the war on Yemen for in 9 years, a war that left tens of thousands of Yemeni children dead, famished, maimed, injured. For what? Why were we supporting that war? So the United States has long been supporting human rights violations in other countries. We occupied Iraq for 15 years and are responsible for the deaths of 1 million Iraqis. We occupied Afghanistan for 20 years. But I think somehow we managed to survive the reputational damage of those wars. But this one, there's no coming back from, because we can see it all. Everything is on live stream. We see the images, the videos every day. You can't hide from it. You know, no, I don't think the United States will ever be able to come back from this.
I have a couple questions from the comment sections. One of the first ones is, as a Jew, what is his perspective on the brainwashing / censorship of Israeli society?
Israeli society is, unfortunately, it is a society that has been completely and totally and utterly brainwashed to believe that Palestinians are animals, to believe that Palestinians are Nazis. This is, by the way, nothing new. It was already in 2015 that Benjamin Netanyahu tried to convince the world, without any evidence at all, that Hitler himself was inspired by a Palestinian, that Hitler came up with the final solution after having been convinced of it by Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Palestinian from Jerusalem. So this idea of trying to liken Palestinians to Nazis, liken Palestinians to human animals, to say that there are no innocents in Gaza. By the way, that expression long predates October 7th. That when Isaac Herzog said there are no innocents in Gaza, when he said that in October 2023, he was just repeating the words of the former Israeli defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman, who said the exact same thing in 2018. Avigdor Lieberman in 2018 said there are no innocents in Gaza. They've been dehumanizing Palestinians not for years, but for decades. Israelis are taught to believe that Palestinians and Arabs just want to kill them, that they're all genocidal crazy people, that they're not human, that they're just raised to hate. That is the attitude in Israeli society. They are brainwashed. And then on top of that, the entire society, there's a deeper problem here, right? Beyond the brainwashing, which is that you're talking about a society and a military where there is no distinction between the two. The military is the society. Israeli society is the Israeli military. There's no distinction. Every single Israeli Jew is required. That's not to say they all go to the military, but military service is compulsory. It's like going to the university. It's like going to high school. You don't think of going to high school. It's like a rite of passage. It's just what you do. And then Israeli males are required to serve in the Israeli military in reserve duty until middle age, until they're in their 40s or 50s. So you have an entire society that sees itself as part of the Israeli military. So whatever the Israeli military is doing, it's going to have broad support within Israeli society, because the Israeli society is made up, the Israeli military is just made up of the rank and file of the entire society. You have 400,000 Israeli reserve soldiers in a society of 7 million Jews. You're talking about 8% of the population serves in the military. You're talking about an entire society from the moment they enter the planet Earth, from the moment they're born until the moment they turn 18, they're taught to believe that the Israeli military is a force for good in the world, right? They're just so completely brainwashed to believe that the Israeli military can do no wrong, and that Palestinians are born to hate. And so, if we kill them all, probably for the better. And it's a very deeply ingrained brainwashed society, and needs to be, honestly, completely deprogrammed. I think the only real solution here, you need almost a kind of foreign military occupation that will take over the institutions of the state, that will remove every single person in power today, literally every single Israeli Jew in the Knesset is genocidal, with the exception of Ofer Kaspi, who's the only non-Zionist Jew in the Israeli Knesset. But you need to literally remove everyone from power. Every media institution, every media professional needs to be arrested and put in prison for incitement to genocide. The entire education system, every teacher in every school needs to be replaced. You need a complete, basically, I don't know what to say, the entire society needs to be deprogrammed. The way you deprogrammed Nazi Germany after World War II, the same thing needs to happen in Israel.
So, Dr. Foster, just TikTok have like a lot of censorship, so like we can't say some words, like we refer to them as schmatzis, because like if you say it multiple times, you could get banned.
My apologies. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. Also, we call their leader Mustache Man. So on the panel, whoever doesn't have any questions, I would like to ask you to drop, because a lot of people have questions. Yazan, you have a question. Go ahead, Yazan. Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question, engineer, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead, Lal.
Okay, so I understand that, before Arabic was the dominant language in the region, it was Aramaic. Can you tell us at what point in history was the entire region Arabized, or, the Arabic became the common nomenclature where everyone could understand each other instead of Aramaic, for example. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, certainly. So there was actually a period of many centuries between the time Aramaic was the dominant lingua franca in the Near East and the time Arabic predominated. You could say that the first major language to be spoken across the region was Greek after the Greek conquests. And then you had the Roman conquests, and so Latin prevailed. And then you had the Byzantine conquests, in which Greek predominated, right? And then after the Byzantine period, you had the Islamic conquests in the 7th century. So beginning in the 7th century, you start to see Arabic text. The surviving texts don't really appear to the 8th century, but it's over the course of the next few hundred years that you see the gradual Islamicization and Arabization of Palestine. But it was a slow process, and that's generally not well appreciated. But you have a period of many, many centuries during which Arabic is increasingly becoming the dominant language of everyone in Palestine. But even as late as the 11th, 12th century, you still have Christians in Palestine using Greek rather than Arabic. But then I would say beginning in maybe 12th, 13th, 14th century, increasingly Arabic is even used by Christians in Palestine as well. So it's a very gradual process over the course of many, many hundreds of years from the 7th century onwards, in which Arabic slowly becomes the predominant language in Palestine.
Can you then tell us how that leads up into the Arab nationalism that we saw at the dawn of the 20th century, basically, or the late 1800s?
Yeah, absolutely. So you could say that sort of the earliest versions of Arab nationalism can be traced to the mid to late 19th century, when you have many writers around the Arab world, people like Butrus al-Bustani, who start to publish newspapers and journals and magazines in Arabic, talking about Arab culture, Arab history, Arab language. On that, you could say that period really begins, I would say, in Syria and Lebanon in the 1860s, and Egypt, you could say as well, with people like Rifa' al-Tahtawi, who is a very prominent Egyptian intellectual in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. But these are the people who kind of revive, who start to publish texts in Arabic. This period is known as the Nahda, the Arab Renaissance, during which time you start to see these Arab movements appear in the Ottoman Empire, which eventually boils over into these Arab movements. During World War I, you have, for example, many dozens of Arab nationalists who are hung in Damascus and Beirut for accusations of treason, because they want independence for the Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire. And then you could say the real first kind of manifestation of this Arab nationalist movement is the Arab revolt during World War I, during which time the Arabs from the Hijaz, from what is today Saudi Arabia, from the towns of Mecca and Medina when they basically raise up an army and invade what is now Jordan, and then move up to Damascus and establish a capital, a state in Damascus in 1918, led by a guy by the name of Faisal, King Faisal, who is, I believe, the son of the Hajj.
Sharif
Sharif
Hussein.
Hussein of Mecca. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that you could say is kind of the beginnings of Arab nationalism. Then obviously things pick up in the interwar period, and then you have obviously Gamal Abdel Nasser in the 50s and 60s, and that is kind of the heyday of Arab nationalism, let's say, but has a long history before that.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions on the panel? Yazan, you were next. Go ahead, Yazan.
I have two questions. My first question, you kind of already touched on this, and before I ask my question, it's an honor to speak to you, and thank you for being here, Zachary Foster. My first question was, many Zionists claim that the Palestinian identity was an invention created by the PLO and KGB. What are your thoughts on this claim?
Yeah, so we actually did cover this. I can try and briefly summarize the point, which is that the Palestinian identity, actually the very first person to ever, maybe I can add more to what I said before, but the very first person, as far as I can tell, who calls himself Palestinian in Arabic is a guy by the name of Al-Muqaddisi, or he is also known as Al-Maqdisi. He died in 995, so we're talking more than 1,000 years ago. And he wrote a book which he published, in the 10th century, called Ahsan el-Taqasim fi Ma'rifat al-Aqalim. It's a book which it's a geographical treatise. He travels around the Muslim world, and he visits Iran, and he's asked on his visit to Iran, he's asked by somebody who is, that he meets there, where are you from? And he says, "Ana Filistini." And he says that in a book 1,000 years ago. So there's evidence of a Palestinian identity more than 1,000 years ago. We don't have so many sources between then and between then and the 19th century. Like I said, there are a few sources of hadith transmitters who are calling themselves Filistini. But you could say the real modern Palestinian identity, the first people to start calling themselves Palestinians are people like Khalil Beiras in 1898. But I think the identity was already in use before then, because like I said, you have even English writers like James Finn, who was the British consul in Jerusalem. He publishes a book in 1870 where he's calling the people of Palestine Palestinians. So in 1870, the term was probably already in use, which is 2.5 decades before Herzl published his book, Jewish State, which is a decade and a half before you have any Zionist settlers in Palestine at all. So as far as I can tell, the term was in use even before Zionism existed as a Jewish movement to send Jews to Palestine.
Thank you so much for that response. My second question would be, it's basically just another Zionist claim. Zionists claim that during the Nakba, Palestinians were not expelled, but rather they left on their own accords, according to the Arab armies. What are your thoughts on this myth, and how would you address it?
So the first thing to say here is that according to international law, it actually doesn't even matter why they left. I will address that in a moment, but let's just assume they're correct. Let's just concede the point, which is false, which I'll get to in a minute. But let's concede the false point that actually they left on their own. It actually doesn't matter, because the fact is they were not allowed to return to their homes. And under international law, the reason, in my view, why the ethnic cleansing is the correct description of what happened in 48 is because they are not allowed to return to their homes at the end of the war. And there's one and only one reason for that. There are not two reasons. There's one reason. It's because they're Palestinian. Because there were Jews displaced from their homes during the war as well, and they were allowed to return to their homes. But the Palestinians were not allowed. They were pushed into the West Bank. They were pushed into Lebanon, and they were pushed into Gaza. And what did Israel do? From 1948 until 1956, Israeli soldiers who were stationed on the borders, they were given an order. That order was shoot to kill. Anyone crossing the armistice lines, shoot them, and try to kill them. And according to Benny Morris, his book, The Border Wars, which he published, I believe, in the 1980s or 90s. So he published a book on this topic, and he cites a Israeli Foreign Ministry document from 1956, which estimates that Israeli soldiers killed between 2,700 and 5,000 Palestinians trying to return to their homes, the vast majority of whom were unarmed, between the years 1949 and 1956. So that's the first point to say. The second point is that, no, this is just mythology. The vast majority of the 750,000 Palestinians who were made refugees during the war were violently ethnically cleansed from their homes. Let me repeat that. The vast majority of the Palestinian refugees, the 750,000 Palestinian refugees, were violently ethnically cleansed from their homes. It breaks down as follows. You have an Israeli, and just to cite one source to support that argument, again, Benny Morris, he's the authority here. He cites an Israeli military document that was produced in June 1948, okay, which is sort of midway through the ethnic cleansing. About half of the 750 were ethnically cleansed before that, about half after. But basically, at that point in the war, the Israeli military produces a document where it tries to describe it cites about 9 reasons that led, that were the cause of the refugee issue, okay? And if you'll just give me a moment, I will actually just pull up this document because it's a remarkable document. Now, okay, sorry, excuse me, I said 9 factors. They said 11 factors that caused the exodus. Here are the top 3, okay? Number 1, direct hostile Zionist operations against Arab settlements. According to the Israeli military itself, the number 1 cause of the flight up through June 48 was ethnic cleansing operations, hostile Zionist operations. The number 2 cause, the effect of Zionist hostile operations against nearby Arab settlements. In other words, because of the massacre in Deir Yassin in April 48, all the other villages also didn't want to get massacred, so they left. Right, so it was indirect, as an effect of the hostile operations. And number 3 was operations by militant Zionist organizations, Irgun and Lehi. Okay, so the number 1, the number 2, so the first one was hostile operations by Haganah, which was the main Zionist militia. Number 2 was, as an indirect result of those massacres and ethnic cleansing operations, more people left. And then number 3 was massacres and ethnic cleansing operations carried out by the Irgun and the Lehi, which were you could say the other paramilitary, other Zionist militias in Palestine at the time. So even according to Zionist sources, there's no debate here. It's just mythology that they were ordered by Arab leaders. There's basically no evidence to support that at all. There were no calls by Arab leaders for Palestinians to leave. So that's just mythology that was invented, that was invented by Zionists in order to try to cover up the crimes that they committed. It's just mythology. And then, by the way, that was a June 1948 report. In the fall were some of the most violent ethnic cleansing operations that happened in the entire war. So actually things got even worse after that report came out. The Israeli army went north into the Galilee in the fall, in October and November, and just ethnically cleansed everybody. And then they went into the south during the same period, and they just ethnically cleansed everybody. Okay? So in the fall, things got worse. Things got worse after the Israeli military determined the number 1, the number 2, and the number 3 causes of the flight was direct Zionist military operations. And I'll end there.
Engineer, I do have one last question, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay. This is a little bit of a jump to modern times. This is like a simple question. You can choose to answer how you'd like. Could you give us some examples of apartheid that are currently taking place in Israel proper, or even the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip?
Absolutely. So, you could say at least in my view, it's fair to characterize Israeli rule within its 48 borders as an apartheid state. And it's also obviously even much more so obvious that Israel is operating an apartheid regime in the West Bank. And Gaza is a little bit different. It's not so much apartheid as it is genocide. But let's start with Israel proper. So, which is, I think, the hardest for some people to believe. But within Israel, there are something like 60 laws that are explicitly discriminatory against Arabs. I'll give you one. Okay, so if you are a Palestinian citizen of Israel, Israel controls your right to love. You are not allowed to marry a Palestinian from West Bank or Gaza. Okay, there's no such restrictions placed on Jewish citizens. They can marry whoever they want. But a Palestinian citizen cannot bring in a potential loved one. It could be, by the way, it's not just a partner. It's also a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, or a son or a daughter. But why do they have that restriction? Well, there's one and only one reason, because they're Palestinian from Gaza or the West Bank. So that's a very obvious example. There's also a law basically in Israel that was passed in I forget exactly what year, but there's about 900 towns in Israel who have these. They're basically the kibbutzim and the moshavim, these kind of rural communities in Israel. There's many hundreds of them, and they have admissions committees. Okay, if you want to live in one of these communities, you have to apply to live there. And basically, over the course of the past many decades, we've discovered that Arabs are not allowed in, right? 99.7% of people who live in those communities are Jewish. 99.7%, okay? Why is that? It's because Arabs are not allowed to live in those communities. They're effectively denied by these admissions committees on these very nebulous rules that they're not fit for life in a rural community, right? That is the language that is used. So that is another law, and there's like 60 some other laws that explicitly or implicitly discriminate against Palestinians inside the state of Israel. Now, once you move to the West Bank, I mean, it becomes painfully obvious. I mean, Palestinians and Israelis are subject to two different legal systems, right? If you're an Israeli in Hebron and you get arrested, you're required to be brought before a judge in 24 hours. If you're a Palestinian and you live in Hebron, you're required to be brought before a judge in 192 hours. You have to wait, 8 times as long because you're of a different, you're of the wrong religion, you're of the wrong ethnicity. So you're going to sit in prison for 2 weeks rather than 1 day because you're a Palestinian, not Jewish. This is one example, but we could cite hundreds and hundreds of other examples. You have a policy known as administrative detention. Okay, this policy is it's a very awkward name because basically you can be detained for having committed a crime in the future. That is what Israel charges Palestinians with in the West Bank and Gaza. They call it administrative detention. I would call it hostage taking because the people who are being arrested have not committed any crimes. They're not being told why they're being arrested, so they cannot present a legal defense. And their imprisonment can be renewed forever, indefinitely. And you have many cases of Palestinians sitting in prison for 5, 10, 15 years without having been charged with anything. Why? Again, one and one reason only: they're Palestinian. That policy does not apply to Jews. Jews are not subject to that policy. And so that's another example of an apartheid law. Different legal systems for different categories of human being. And we could obviously cite many hundreds, dozens more, hundreds more examples. But those are just a few of the examples of how Israeli apartheid works in Israel and in the West Bank.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. Yes, and I'm gonna drop you. Palestinian warrior, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question, but before I ask the question, I'd like to show Dr. Foster, if I may, a book that's been passed down from family member to family member. It's called The Christian in Palestine. It was written and published in 1840 by a British man who went and visited Palestine. And in this book, it describes everything from the literature to the culture to the scenery to the churches, the mosque, all of that. And it's been in my family for generations. And I just wanted to show you guys this. It's a treasure. We've kept it. It's currently with my family members. But my question is, and I know we've all been waiting for this question, can you describe every Israeli accusation is an Israeli confession, starting with the human shields narrative, especially when it comes to us using Palestinians, our own people, as human shields, when in fact it is the Israelis who use Palestinians as human shields, as I've heard in your podcast, and I'm a huge fan that you went into grave detail about this, and I'd like you to share it with the panel, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly very happy to talk about that. So first of all, you're absolutely correct that it seems like every Israeli accusation is in fact a confession, and I think there are no better examples of that than the accusation that Palestinians are use other Palestinians as human shields. The reality, of course, is that Israel uses Palestinians as human shields and has been doing so for decades. I mean, you have reports in the 1970s of Israel doing this. We don't need to go that far back, though. In fact, you have an Israeli military report, and I think it came out in 2005, which documented more than 1,000 instances of, this is an internal report produced by the Israeli military that came out in 2005 that documented, I think, about 1,100 incidents of the Israeli army's use of Palestinians as human shields. This was standard operating procedure. This was official Israeli practice before 2005. And then what happened in 2005 was they realized that this was obviously a violation of international law, and so they officially banned it, but obviously continued to do it. And in fact, you could literally, I encourage everyone listening in right now to just Google the words Israel, human shield, anytime between 2005 and in the present. Literally just search for any 1 year you want, and you will find a documented case of the Israeli military using a Palestinian as a human shield. The documentation may come from a media organization, it may come from a human rights organization, it may come from the UN, but there's no dispute here. This is consensus. This is, we have an example in 2002, 2003 of the Israeli military taking over a house in Gaza and then using the house as a military base and requiring that the Palestinian family who was living in the home remain in the home at all times. They were not allowed to leave the home out of fear that the home would be attacked. And so that was just one example. But basically, this practice continued continuously from 2005 to the present. In Operation Cast Lead in 2008, 2009, you have a dozen some cases during that operation in which more than 1,000 Palestinians were slaughtered. Israel used human shields over and over and over again during that operation. Then the same thing is true in 2000, from 2011 to 2014. You have a report that comes out, I believe, I'm just trying to pull up here it is. From 2010 to 2013, the Committee on the Rights of Children expresses deep concern about the continuous use of Palestinian children as human shields and informants. 14 such cases have been reported on from January 2010 to the 31st of March 2013. 14 cases. Those are just the ones we have proof for. And then from 2013, it just continues unabated. In the 2014 war, Israel, again, dozens of cases were reported on by Al Jazeera, by the United Nations, by Amnesty International, during that operation, during that 55-day war in which Israel slaughtered 2,200 Palestinians. Again, dozens more cases, and they continued long after 2014. We have cases in 2018, and then 2022, 23. They just keep coming and coming and coming. And now, in the most recent genocidal onslaught on Gaza, it's now open. They're admitting it in the open. You have the Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, published a report a few months ago. And remember, anything published by Haaretz had to have been approved by the Israeli military because there's a military censor in Israel. And everything you see published by a newspaper or a magazine based in Israel has to be approved by the Israeli military censor, which means they're admitting it now. It's no longer even a secret. The Israeli military has a policy in Gaza over the past year of grabbing Palestinians. By the way, Palestinian civilians, they're not even Palestinian militants. They're literally using random Palestinians. They dress them as Israeli soldiers. They put Israeli military clothing on these Palestinians and then have them go down into the tunnels because they're worried they're booby-trapped. And that way the Palestinians will die instead of the Israelis. I mean, is this any surprise to anyone who's been watching what has been happening in Gaza over the past year? You think the Israeli military has any concern for Palestinian loss of human life, for Palestinian civilian life? No, this is standard operating procedure. Time and time again in Gaza and the West Bank and Jerusalem, Israel has repeatedly and consistently used Palestinians as human shields as an ongoing policy for the past 2 decades.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Janine or Zenobia, you have questions? Which one of you would like to go first?
I have a
Palestinian, I'm
question
gonna
as
go.
well, by the way, but I'll just go after Janine or Zenobia.
No, Kobe, you can go ahead before me.
Zenobia, you want to go first, or you want to go after Kobe? Since
Yeah, I'll ask. I take it that you would have read works by Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman. I just wanted your opinion on the archaeological findings or lack thereof, and the artificial archaeological findings that are in Israeli museums. I'm very interested in the archaeology at the moment, but Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman have books talking about Jerusalem and David and Solomon and stuff, and I just wanted your opinion on their works.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Look, I do have to confess that this is a bit far afield from my area of expertise, so I couldn't speak to those books themselves. What I can say, though, is that archaeology is incredibly political in the state of Israel, okay? Every archaeological dig is political. Who gets funds to dig where, in which neighborhoods, is political. No archaeological dig in Israel is apolitical. And I think it's been known for many decades now that there just isn't much evidence, archaeological evidence, that corroborates any of the details from the Jewish Bible, from the Old Testament, right? These characters that we call Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, the 40-year trek through the desert. There's zero archaeological evidence. There's no independent evidence outside of the Bible itself that any of those things happened. Even for the later periods, like the Kingdom of David, extremely scant evidence. And again, like I said, everything is political in Israel. Every archaeological site in Israel is political. The goal of who gets funded to dig where is basically guided by kind of the nationalist principles of the state of Israel, which is let's dig up, let's try our best to find archaeological evidence to support the existence of these ancient Israelite kingdoms, and completely ignore the intervening 3,000-year period. And so it almost, the methodology kind of, you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. The methodological approach is extremely problematic. And that's why I'm not even sure I would really trust the archaeological findings that are coming out of Israel today.
I have a question, if that's okay.
of course, but wait. Is it the same subject or something else?
It's the same subject.
Then go ahead. Okay.
Well, and the same subject as the previous question, or?
Yeah, is it the same as Zenubia's question? If not, then we will...
No, it's separate. Sorry, I thought we were done with that question.
Okay, so let's give Kovi, she's been waiting also to ask. Go ahead, Kovi.
Lal, you can go before me if you want to ask your question.
Sorry, I just came back, so I wasn't sure. I had to step away for a minute, so I didn't realize that you were waiting before me. Go ahead, Kobe.
Oh, okay. So, hi, Dr. Foster. It's actually an honor. I've read The Invention of Palestine on Live, so I really, really do love your work. And I don't know if you remember, I think we were in communication via Chris. So, with regards to yeah, so I kind of have 3 questions, I would say. The first question is, so Naomi Klein talks about how Israel has made trauma kind of a weapon of war. So she mentions how Israeli society is basically kept in this cycle of re-traumatization and vengeance, whether it is through the Shoah or now through October the 7th, and you have countless like rituals and films being made and all of those different things as well, basically just being a part of the landscape, so to say. So as a person who has visited Israel yourself, do you think Naomi Klein's argument has any validity when it comes to her arguing that Israel has used trauma as a weapon of war? And if so, have you maybe personally experienced this or seen this firsthand?
First of all, Kobe, thank you so much for joining this stream and for contributing. It's a great question. I have heard Naomi Klein make that point, actually, and I completely agree with her. I think that at the core of Israeli culture, I would even say at the core of Jewish culture around the world, in many, many countries, is this idea that is sort of kind of this weaponization of trauma, of our historical trauma as a people, which is used and abused to justify everything and anything and all forms of violence against Palestinians. And she's completely right. I mean, if you ask Israelis, if you turn on an Israeli TV, if you read an Israeli newspaper, you will find story after story after story of Jewish victims, the families of the hostages, the families of those killed at the music festival, the trauma being lived on by the Israeli soldiers who are just traumatized at the horrible things that they have done. I mean, even CNN is now publishing articles talking about the trauma of the Israeli soldiers who have been sent into Gaza to carry out a genocide. Oh my God, how much trauma that they are experiencing now that they're back in peacetime, living trying to return and reintegrate into Israeli society, and they just can't do it because of all the trauma they faced. And this is the narrative in Israel. It's a narrative of continuous collective re-traumatization and weaponization of that trauma. Absolutely correct.
Thank you very much for that. I think like the second question I had was, again, another thing that I found very interesting. Did you watch The Zone of the Interest?
The movie about the family living right next to the concentration camp, yeah? Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
I did. I did
So,
see that, yes.
so it was interesting because Jonathan Glazer said that in that film, he felt like genocide had become an ambient. And he basically tried to explain how atrocities and genocide kind of became like white noise. And I would say that when I was watching that film, I identified heavily with what was happening in Gaza right now with regards to how we as a society have managed to kind of turn such profound evil into white noise as well. How do you think we can break through that normalization of atrocities within the global South, especially kind of stop making it into white noise? As an academic yourself, how do you think you can kind of break through that when it comes to students, when it comes to just general society and general discourse around marginalized and oppressed people, or Palestinians specifically in this case?
It's really such a good question because what we're trying to fight here is human nature itself, because our species has this incredible ability to adapt to anything. We can adapt to the most extreme circumstances we find ourselves in. That is one of our secrets as a species. And so when we see the same images every day, day after day after day, we just eventually become numb to them. And so what you're asking is, how do we fight against our own nature as a species? It is incredibly difficult. I can't pretend to know the answer to that. What I can say is that I think, I think we have to continually emphasize that this is the issue of our time. This is, You could say that, in 2007 it was Darfur, and in 1995 it was Bosnia, and maybe in 2016 it was Yemen, and in 2023 and 2024 it's Gaza. That is the issue of our time, and so just continually reminding people that what would you have done during the Holocaust is not a theoretical question. The answer is what you are doing now is what you would have done then, and continually reminding people of that, and trying our best to to stay strong and to fight the feeling that we ourselves are gonna feel that sense of just that kind of inability to keep the struggle and keep things at the top of the agenda. But it's an incredibly difficult question. I don't pretend to have the answer, and if anyone else wants to jump in and offer some
I'm
words of
sorry.
wisdom,
Yeah, I just wanted to hear your perspective on this. I'm sorry. I was very interested in seeing your perspective on this, but it is a very difficult question. I understand that. Do you think of that as the new norm? Like, I know I come from the field of post-colonial studies, so I do know that this has been done time and time again for the past couple of centuries in the global South. But for it to be so televised in real time with impunity, do you think that if we continue to let it happen, that in your opinion, this will be the new norm to any marginalized group of people, even within the imperial core, not necessarily only in the global South?
my gosh, I hope this is not the new norm. I mean, there's 2 million people who are being literally wiped off the face of the earth as we speak. My God, we can't let this become the new normal. We have to continue to fight. No, I can't accept that. No.
Okay. And my last question, I've asked so many questions. I'm so sorry, y'all. My last question, when I was reading The Invention of Palestine, you talked about King Faisal, I think, and for a brief moment in time where Palestinians were demanding to be known as Southern Syrians, they didn't essentially say that Palestine was Syria, but they wanted it to be declared as Southern Syria. And I wanted you to elaborate on why, for that brief moment in time, they were doing so.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the period from 1918 to 1920 was a very brief period of history during which time, like you said, King Faisal, after having revolted against the Ottoman Empire, established an Arabic kingdom in Damascus in 1918. And after 400 years of Ottoman rule, after 400 years of Arabs living under Ottoman rule, finally, for the first time in many, many centuries, Arabs had a state of their own, an independent Arabic kingdom, not just an independent kingdom, not subject to any colonial power, but one that was semi-democratic in the sense that it had a constitutional assembly, okay, and the Syrian General Congress. And in fact, Palestinians played a key role in that administration. Just to give you a few examples, you had the single most important advisor to King Faisal, his number two, was a guy by the name of Auni Abdul Hadi from Nablus. He was the personal secretary and political advisor to King Faisal himself. And then you had the Minister of Finance, was Muhammad Isaac Darwaza, who was also from Nablus. And he was a very prominent politician in the 1920s and 30s in Palestine. You had Subhi al-Khadra from Safad, who was the chief of police. You had Muhammad Ali Bey al-Tamimi, also from Nablus, who was also head of police. You had the head of the Arab Club, was from Tulkarm, a guy by the name of Abdurrahman al-Hajj Ibrahim. So basically, the entire leadership of the Arabic kingdom in Damascus was Palestinian. Okay? Now keep that all in mind. Now hold that thought. At the same time that you have a semi-democratic, independent Arab regime with many Palestinians in the center of that regime, based in Damascus, at the same time, you have the British occupy Palestine after having declared the Balfour Declaration, after having promised to turn Palestine into a Jewish homeland. So if you're Palestinian in 1918 or 1919, and your options are British occupation, colonialism, Zionism on the one hand, or independent, semi-democratic, semi-Palestinian rule from Damascus on the other, what are you going to choose? Well, guess what the Palestinians chose overwhelmingly? They said, Palestine is not Palestine, it's southern Syria. They said, we're not Palestinians, we're southern Syrians. Out of their love for Palestine, they insisted they were not Palestinian, they were southern Syrian. That is how I would characterize the brief period of kind of the southern Syrian affair from 1918 to 1920.
May I ask a question?
Wait, I want to get something out real quick before I need to drop. I did see in the comments, Hibba said that you made a trip to Gaza, and I was actually going to ask you in regards to the allegations made on October 7th. Many of the extreme allegations were never verified by Israel. As a matter of fact, the UN has asked for evidence from Israel multiple times. Why do you think it is that Israel has not? This is a two-part question, by the way. Why do you think Israel has not responded to these questions? And also, how do we respond to people who call us T sympathizers because we refuse to hold H group accountable for the majority of the ongoings that happened on October 7th?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. I believe it was in January 2024, a commission sent from the UN showed up in Israel and was summarily rejected and was not allowed to conduct an investigation. Israel rejected the UN's attempt to investigate what happened on October 7th. Instead, you had basically, why is that? So, I mean, we all know the reason. It's because Israel does not want there to be an impartial, independent investigation about what happened. And we all know the reason. Because that investigation will determine that many, if not most of these atrocity hoaxes were false. The 40 beheaded babies hoax, the babies cooked in the ovens hoax, the pregnant woman whose fetus was ripped out hoax, the mass perpetrated rape hoax. Well, these were all hoaxes. There's no evidence for any of those things. And the investigation would obviously determine that, because there's no evidence to support any of those claims. And then, of course, they would also uncover the even darker, disturbing fact that many of the victims on October 7th were killed by Israel, not Palestinians. And we know this. I mean, we've all known this since October, when reports started to surface. The first report surfaced from Porat, a woman her last name was Porat. Now her first name is escaping me.
Yasmin.
Thank you. Yasmin Porat was interviewed on Israeli Army radio in October 2023, in which she said, the Israeli tank showed up, we negotiated for a while, and then they fired a tank into the home that was home to about a dozen Israeli civilians, and they were all killed in a single moment. There were screams being heard before the tank was fired a shell into the home, and then all the voices went silent, and they were all slaughtered by Israel. So we knew already in October 2023 that Israel had killed its own citizens on October 7th. And then what came out in the months that followed was not one or two, but about at least in 6 separate locations, at least, probably more, the Hannibal Directive was issued on October 7th. Now, what is the Hannibal Directive? The Hannibal Directive was an Israeli military doctrine first introduced in the 1980s that says, better to kill our soldiers and civilians than let them be captured. And that is exactly the order that was issued, not once, not twice, but at least 6 times on October 7th. You had Israeli Apache helicopters firing rounds and rounds of ammunitions into anything going into Gaza. They killed perhaps hundreds of Israeli civilians. We don't know the numbers, maybe dozens, maybe hundreds. We just don't know, because Israel does not want there to be a full investigation. So you're absolutely correct about that. I think that was, maybe there was a
What are
two-part question.
your
Maybe I forgot the other part. Sorry.
No, I just want to know, like, with your experience in Gaza, what are your thoughts on the political position of H group,
Um,
the political one, not the combatant one?
what are my thoughts on the? I guess I'm sorry. Just to say the question one more time.
Well, do you feel like my question to you, I guess I'm tiptoeing around it, is do you feel that they intentionally went in on October 7th to target civilians?
Gotcha. Well, look, I think what is clear from the evidence is that there were at least 2 or 3 waves of Palestinians who entered Israel on October 7th. The first wave were the Hamas fighters themselves from the Nukhba brigade, who were very clearly going after Israeli military targets. In fact, for example, in the kibbutzim like Be'eri and Re'im and Kfar Aza, there are basically Israeli military bases embedded in those civilian communities, and the Hamas fighters went after the Israeli military bases, right? So, and of course, they were perfectly happy to kill anyone along the way. But it's very clear they were going after military targets, and the same is true, by the way, at the Rave. The Rave was kind of in the direct path towards the kind of Southern Command, the HQ, in charge of the Gaza division. And it's also very clear that Hamas had no idea there was a rave going on there, because even a few days before the rave location was changed, right? So that was probably a surprise to them. We have a lot of video footage of atrocities committed on that day. No one's denying that. But it's also very clear that they had clear military objectives, and they obviously committed war crimes in the process. By killing innocent civilians. But there's no question that their ultimate goal, as far as I can tell, was to capture as many Israelis as possible and bring them back to Gaza. And this we also know from Sinwar, who spent 2 decades in Israeli prisons and was obsessed with getting those prisoners out of prison. Just read his novel. Listen to him, his interview with Vice News in 2021. He was obsessed with getting those Palestinian political prisoners out of prison. And so that's why I think as soon as we heard these hoaxes, like the mass rape hoax, we knew that there was obviously something fishy about this story, because when you're trying to kidnap, when you're trying to get hostages, it's probably not gonna. If you take a 30-minute break to go commit mass rape, that's probably not gonna help you get hostages, right? So, anyways, all of that is just to say that. So like I said, there were multiple streams of Palestinians, who went into Israel. And the first stream, what the Nukhba brigade, they were clearly going after military targets. Now, what happened afterwards was the Israeli military was caught so off guard, and the entire Gaza division was completely destroyed. It was a military victory of, I would say, almost unimaginable proportions. No one expected this paper tiger to collapse in a few hours, but that is in fact what happened. And so over the course of the next few hours, there were hundreds of breaches in the wall, and many Palestinians who were not associated with Hamas, who were either from other factions or were just literally Palestinians, from Gaza, streamed into Israel to loot, to kill, to kidnap, whatever. And I think that is actually where most of the atrocities happened. So all of that is just to say that. I think October 7th has been, obviously, as we know, the propaganda, the mythology, the hoaxes. This is the narrative, which obviously, I think misses, really distorts what the reality of what happened on October 7th.
Are you gonna ask
Thank
him,
you.
or
I appreciate that. I'm gonna drop now.
Someone's asking, how was your experience being escorted by H group?
Being escorted by age group?
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm not quite sure I follow the question, though. What do you mean?
It was a question in the comment section, I guess, because you were in Gaza and you
Yeah,
had to be escorted around.
Okay. Well, so I was in Gaza. I was not escorted around. No. I was, I was able to move around without an escort.
Oh, somebody said, do you know what H group is?
Yeah, that's I guess what I'm confusing.
H group is HAMAS.
Gotcha. Sorry, age group. Sorry, there's an age group. I'm sorry.
No, H group. This is TikTok. We have to use TikTok safety language.
Guys, I am too old for this platform. I apologize.
No, you're fine.
Like I said, I was actually more afraid of the Israeli military than I was the age group. But no, I did not have to, I was not escorted around. I was able to move around relatively freely, so I did not have to deal with that. No.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. Mitri, you have a question?
Engineer, I've been waiting a long time because, like earlier when I spoke earlier, I said I had more questions, but I wanted to
go ahead, Lab. Go ahead.
Yeah. So my main question here is, so with regards to I guess the whole episodes between, 1917 to 1948, with all of the immigrants coming in from Europe, how did they forget so easily? And so especially the Holocaust survivors, which my own family were Holocaust survivors as well on my mother's side of the family, they made the conscientious decision not to move to Palestine, but they were within the same cohort as Ashkenazi Jews. And I'm just trying to figure out where were the regular civilians? I'm not talking about like the Haganah, Irgun Lehi, Palmach, like all of those groups. I'm talking about regular civilians, right, that became Palestinian citizens. What happened to those people? How is it that their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren today don't remember that the Palestinians used to live there? Like that. Why didn't they protect the Palestinians? Why didn't they defend them? Why didn't they march on the streets demanding that the Palestinians be returned home after the Nakba, after the atrocities that the Irgun and the Lehi they have committed? Like, where were they? Why aren't we getting the same sympathies? The Palestinian people have never forgotten the Nakba. They've never forgotten. They still hold the keys to their home. How is it that they were so easy to forget? I get so confused by that. Can you please shed some light on that, please?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I ask myself that same question all the time, by the way. How is it that in the aftermath of the mass expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians from their homes, that the world just basically accepted it? And in fact, in the years after 1948, 1949, the world spoke about this issue as a humanitarian issue. We have to establish a refugee agency. We have to provide them education and housing and aid. But it was not discussed as a political issue. And in my estimation, the reason is because of the tremendous guilt felt by the leaders of the UK, of the United States, of other Western European countries, for having for not allowing for keeping their borders closed at a time when Jews were being slaughtered in the millions. So this was their way of making up for their own complicity in the slaughter of millions of Jews in Europe during World War II. And so they basically, almost as a compensation for the Jewish suffering in the Holocaust, they almost turned a blind eye to the Israeli expulsion of the Palestinian people during the Nakba. That is my analysis, and I think the evidence supports that. The states of the West, the United States, they did not pressure Israel at all to allow the refugees to return home. There was no pressure placed on Israel to do that, and I think the reason is because they all felt the guilt. They were the ones who closed their doors to Jews as they were being slaughtered in Europe, and I think it was that guilty feeling that led them to turn a blind eye to what happened to the Palestinians.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. We actually have like a lot of people requesting to come up and ask questions. I don't know how much time do you have for us, Dr. Zachary?
Yeah, we should wrap pretty soon because I do need to make a move. I could do maybe one or two more questions.
Okay, Mitri, you have a question? Go ahead, Mitri.
Yes, thank you. Can you guys hear me, or should I put my headset real quick?
No,
Is the
we hear
voice?
you. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, Dr. Zachary, thank you very much. Honored to speak with you and ask you the question.
Absolutely.
Okay, as a person who lived there, throughout the year and coming to the United States, back when I was there, stuff that you mentioned earlier a lot, it was strange how the world doesn't see the atrocities they do, which became so small and we became so used to it that we thought that, hey, they don't know about it. They just don't know about it. When I came to the United States and realized that, yeah, they have no clue about that stuff. And you remember the stuff that you mentioned earlier about stuff that was mentioned. But anyways, aside from that, the back in the day, the UN was created to help them after the Holocaust and all that stuff. But now they don't. Whatever happens, that is obviously the whole world sees that it is not correct. It's not true. But nobody can do anything. Nobody can say anything. Yet to the point where they don't recognize it and they wouldn't want to recognize it, even with all the whole international accord that's been going on after October and all that stuff. What is there? What can the world do? What can we do? What can the world do at this point to like a new entity like the UN or something, a new world organization that stops taking the whole mentality of the Western mentality of no, and all these dressed up lies that happens to tell people that, oh, no, it didn't happen like that. It happened. And what we talked about earlier, what you mentioned earlier, we all know what it is. It's just hiding the truth, or even if it's there, there's nobody that can do anything about it more than the all the colleges now that they're standing with us and helping us, which is amazing. But yet it's still, look how many, about 200,000 now, between already unalived and already under the rubble. What is there that can, some new order, some new organization order, something that can tell them or start doing something about that? I'm sorry, I know it's a little confusing, maybe what I'm asking, but it's just that we're at a point where, look, it's been 76 years and more of the same stuff, and all what we get, especially when we were there, we got used to it. And now even we're seeing the whole world is the same thing, that there's nothing that can be done. Is there some idea? Sorry about that, it was a little bit long.
No, thank you for that question. Look, I think we're all asking that same question. What can we do? I think it really, there's no right or wrong way to be an activist or a supporter of the Palestinians. I think it really just depends on your position in the world. Are you a student? Can you join a protest camp and advocate for your university's divestment from companies profiting off genocide? Or do you work at a company that is investing in providing military or technological support to the Israeli military? Are you a citizen of a country where you can vote and raise your voice at the ballot box to elect candidates who protest, who will impose arms embargoes on Israel? Do you have family members that you can convince? Do you have friends you can convince? Are you a member of a community center, a synagogue, a church, a mosque? Are you belong to an institution that has funds that can be directed to support Palestinians? Are you? Yeah, there's no right or wrong. Do you have yourself your own budget where you have purchasing power and you can support companies that boycott Israel? So there's no right or wrong way to be an activist. It just depends on your skill set. Do you have a voice? Do you have a platform on TikTok or on Instagram or Twitter or YouTube? Can you speak out? Can you can you raise your voice? So there's no right or wrong way to be an activist, right? It just depends on your abilities, your interests, your position in the world, and where you have leverage. And I would say I would ask everyone to try to exert leverage wherever they are able to, because like I said, there's no right or wrong way to support the Palestinians.
Thank you, Dr. Foster.
Of course, anybody else that needs my spot for more questions. And I hope, Dr. Zachary, to be able to see you and meet you here again and have more questions answered. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Zetu Zatar, do you have a question?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thank you, brother engineer. Well done for hosting such a great live, informative, and highly educational. Dr. Zach Foster, welcome to the Palestinian community. I'm really happy to see such highly educated, brave people like you who dare to speak out and call things as it is. My name is Zetu Zatar. I'm a Palestinian, like just everybody on the panel. It's not actually, I wouldn't say like a main question. I would, because you said you're going to wrap it up and you want to leave. I wanted to hear from you a last word regarding a few points, if that's possible.
Sure.
First of all, listening to everything you said, which I actually agree with everything you said, except one thing only I can't agree with, which is that some of the people or the people who actually carried the strategical military raid on October 7th, maybe some, as you have mentioned, could commit war crimes. I reject that until there is actually an independent investigation or a Palestinian authority that is nominated by the Palestinian people to investigate that and prove that. Otherwise, I think it will be a Western claim or an Israeli claim. But that's not a big issue, actually. The issue is hearing everything you said, that the Israelis has been using Palestinians as human shields and doing this and that and apartheid, and they are trying to put the Palestinians in a similar game like the Hunger Game, enslave the Palestinians, siege, blockade, and everything. Like they have done literally what the fascist Nazi regime have done. In some cases, they even exceeded these limits. And I hear your passion about what people really should do: resist, fight, speak, platform, stand for that, speak out, blah 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 blah. But then, why do you think some people dare to claim the Palestinian resistance, but they don't dare to claim, for example, the Ukrainian with their war against the Russians? Why the world find many excuses for many resistance movements around the world, but when it comes to the Palestinians, and especially the Palestinian resistance led by Hamas, there's always people want to pick and choose, and they want to blame, they want to try to find anything, ignoring all the struggle and the pain and the suffering that we've been going through. Not to mention, as you said, the Palestinian resistance is not just only carried by Hamas. There is actually Marxists, Christians, non-believers as well, and of course Muslim people within the resistance. As you know, and as of course as you have studied, that the nature of the Palestinian nation is a mixed nation from many different backgrounds religiously. I myself, as an Orthodox Christian, brother engineer is a Muslim, and I believe you are a Jewish. But we all agree on the right of the Palestinian people to resist. What do you tell people who really still dare to doubt or to pick on the Palestinian resistance?
I really appreciate the question, and it's a struggle. I mean, we are dealing with more than a century of propaganda. If you go back and read 19th century travelogues written by Americans and Europeans, they dismissed the native inhabitants as backwards, as uncivilized, as barbaric, as Muslims and Arabs with no culture, with no history. And unfortunately, that is the same attitude today. And it's been 140 years and nothing has changed. In the 1920s and 30s, they had the same attitude. The European Zionists were perceived to be bringing civilization to the barbarians. That was those were the words of Herzl himself. We're a rampart of civilization into a sea of barbarians. Those were his exact words in the Der Judenstaat, in the Jewish state, the book he published in 1896 calling for a Jewish state in Palestine, right? But this was the same attitude that Europeans and Americans had towards the Orient, towards the East. And I hate to say it, but not much has changed since. They still have that attitude. And if you look at the influences of the Israel lobby in the United States, it's totally insane what what is happening. You have every single pro-Palestine politician they're trying to unseat them. They tried to unseat Rashida Tlaib by offering $20 million to Nasser Beydoun to run against her in the primary. And the only reason I know that dollar amount is because he disclosed it, because he did to discourage other people from accepting the blood money. They also offered $20 million to Hill Harper to run against Rashida Tlaib, to try and unseat her. They unseated Jamal Bowman by pumping $15 million into his they were the ones that found someone to run against Jamal Bowman. We're talking about AIPAC. Latimer, they find someone to run against him. They give him $15 million and he takes out Jamal Bowman. Why? Again, he supported a ceasefire. What happened to Cori Bush? They spent $6 million to unseat Cori Bush. They tried to unseat Summer Lee. They tried to unseat Ilhan Omar. Anyone who supports a ceasefire, they go after. And that creates a culture of fear. And so the people who honestly don't have a horse in the race, who probably support the Palestinians deep down inside, but know that it's political suicide because they're going to get tens of millions of dollars spent on the other candidate if they call for a ceasefire in Gaza, let alone an arms embargo. So the AIPAC lobby has corrupted our politicians. And then you have the president himself who in 1982 told Menachem Begin that he didn't kill enough Palestinian women and children in Lebanon. We're talking about Joe Biden, of course, Genocide Joe, who is a lifelong Zionist and who has supported Israeli apartheid for decades, and who is more pro-Israel, perhaps even than the most pro-Israel Israelis. And so you have the Israel lobby compelling politicians to support a genocide. You have the media institutions who are bought and owned by Zionists. You have CNN. You have Jake Tapper, Dana, what's her name? Dana Bosch, Wolf Blitzer, CNN anchor for decades, was a former AIPAC lobbyist himself. Go to the New York Times. Isabel Kirshner, New York Times Jerusalem bureau chief for a decade. Her son is in the Israeli military. I mean, can you imagine the New York Times hiring a Jerusalem bureau chief whose son is a fighter in a Palestinian militant group? I mean, that's literally what you have. But on the Israeli side, you have Thomas Friedman, lifelong Zionist Jew. You have, go down the list, Fox. I mean, I haven't even mentioned the right-wing organizations, which are even more Zionist. MSNBC, Joe Scarborough, a Zionist to his core. HBO, you have Bill Maher, the most vile racist Zionist perhaps of them all. Go down the list of media organizations. They're all Zionist. They're all incredibly racist towards Palestinians. And it's a culture of media indoctrination, of political propaganda that has been, dominating our discourse for decades. You had a study by Maha Nasser published in 2021. She analyzed about 4,000 articles published about Palestinians this is between 1979 and 1979 and 2019. So basically going all the way up to the present. Of those 4,000 articles published about Palestinians in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the Nation, less than 2% of those articles were written by Palestinians. They have been completely shut out of the media discourse in the United States. In the word, to quote Edward Said, Palestinians do not have the permission to narrate. And when they do, they're expected to be perfect victims. They're expected to just die, to be slaughtered and never resist. And that is the world we live in. A world where Palestinians have been completely denied a space in the public discourse, in the media, at the political level. And we're witnessing the consequences of that.
Thank you very much for putting all this out. I myself stand with my resistance and with our right to resist, even if the whole world says something different. I just wanted you to put it out by your own way, as an academic, as a person who have done a lot of researches and stands for what they really believe is right. I just wanted to hear it from you. Anyway, thank you very much for being here. And I really hope that to see you on TikTok within the Palestinian community over and over and over. We really need strong voices. We really need people who really call things out without sugarcoat. and this is really necessary within our movement of liberation. Once again, thank you very much, brother engineer. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm going to drop and give my spot to somebody else. Have a great day.
Okay, then let me just also say thank you so much to the hosts of this stream. Thank you so much for inviting me on. Always happy to come back. Thank you all for being such strong advocates. Please stay strong and keep speaking out and keep fighting. And again, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. Please, everybody follow Dr. Foster so next time he can switch his camera on. He doesn't have enough followers, so please, everybody follow him. Let's get him to 1,000. And follow Dr. Foster on Twitter. Go to Palestine Nexus, check out the maps he have and the courses he have. And if you haven't read The Invention of Palestine, it's available for free. I think it's on academia.org. You can download it from there and read it. It's pretty amazing. I loved it. Thank you for coming, Dr. Foster, and we hope to see you again with us. Thank you so much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
take care, everyone.
Dr. Foster, do you have time for an encore question?
All right, one quick one.
All right, I'm known as Eucalyptus on TikTok, by the way. Pleasure to meet you. You're officially one of my heroes. My question to you is, what is your message to those from your background, from your community background, who are complicit in the G side and continuously advocate for the crime of extermination?
I, my entire life, asked myself and was raised with the question of what would I do if there was another G side? Well, how would I act? What would I do? What would I behave? Because I always wondered, how was it that when my people were being slaughtered, how was it that everyone stood by and did nothing? And so I just want to pose that question to all my Jewish brothers and sisters out there. When you ask yourself, how come no one did anything when you were being slaughtered? Then doesn't that make you ask the question to yourself now, why are you not doing anything? How are you standing by silently as this G-side proceeds at an accelerating pace? How are you standing by and doing nothing? If you were horrified at what happened to your own people, how are you not horrified at what has happened to the Palestinians? And just really want to send so much love to all my Jewish brothers and sisters out there, and just know that we need you. We need you to speak up more than anyone else, and honestly more than at any time in the past. Now is the time to speak up. So thank you so much for that question.
Thank you, Dr. Zach. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Zachary Foster. Have a good evening. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Yes,
so much.
thank you for coming. Thank you. W engineer guys in the chat.